Police releasing surveillance video of the suspect who violently pushed a man onto the tracks of a Brooklyn subway station at Wyckoff and Myrtle Avenues.
41-year-old McCrae is a career criminal with more than 30 arrests, many for violent crimes, including attempted murder.
61-year-old Simon Marshall was unrepentant as police led him out of Midtown Precinct South, admitting to reporters that he pushed 40-year-old Michelle Alyssa Go to her death.
The second time, police say he followed through and pushed the victim off the platform onto the tracks.
This stranger practically puts her in a bear hug and tosses her onto the train tracks as though she's just a sack of potatoes.
There have been 22 people shoved onto the tracks this year compared to 21 last year.
Mr. Reagan.
All right, now recently there was this big news story about a guy who pushed a man onto the train tracks, the subway tracks in New York City. And this is a common story. I've heard of this happening many, many times over the last few years in New York. Just guys are getting pushed onto the subway tracks. Women are being pushed in front of trains. You know, I've heard of people being killed because of this, obviously. Sometimes they're just pushed onto the tracks. But it's almost like an epidemic. It's like this weird trend that we seem to be living through by these like crazy New Yorkers. And I've heard this story countless times on various news networks. I've heard about it on Fox. I've seen it on YouTube videos from local news networks, things like that. And never once do they mention the race of the perpetrators. And here's the thing. I mean, I kind of understand that, right? The thinking is that, well, does the race really matter of these people? They're bad people and they're committing these, vicious acts of violence. But there does seem to be a pattern here. I have never heard of anyone from any other demographic category committing this crime. It's only black men. That is it. Black men are committing these crimes and no one else. The question becomes, at what point do you recognize the pattern here? Is it after 1,000 pushes? Is it after 10,000 pushes? At what point do you go, okay, the only people pushing people onto train tracks here are black men? So this is not a problem of New Yorkers or criminals generally. This is a problem with black men in New York. Why are black men in New York pushing people onto train tracks all the time? It's kind of weird, right? And I'll be honest, I don't really have an answer, but I will try to explore it and try to come up with an answer throughout this video. But at the end of the day, the point really is, and the reason I'm making this video is we have to stop pretending that these are just random criminals, that these are just criminals of whatever type. Maybe they're women, maybe they're white people, maybe they're Muslims. No. These are black men specifically that are committing these crimes. And so the question is, how do we combat this problem? And of course, I do have a few suggestions about how, as a society, we deal with this moving forward, because this is not sustainable. We cannot allow crazy black guys in our society to be running around murdering people at random for the absurd reasons that we do allow that to happen. And I actually believe that we have germinated this problem. We have kind of created this problem as a society, and it's really our own fault. Well, it's really the fault of the left. And I'll explain in one moment. First, of course, I have to tell you something. So, is investing in silver today a good idea? Colin Plume, from our friends at Noble Gold, thinks so. On the national desk, he explained that there had been a huge sell-off of silver because of its low price right now. But silver is the most useful industrial metal out there, and demand is soaring for electronics in electric cars and solar panel circuits as the green agenda speeds up. And as industries pick up after the pandemic supply chain issues, the trend down should reverse quickly, and silver will rocket. Don't miss this. Give the team at Noble Gold a call and join thousands of others who have taken advantage of this blip in the market. They'll guide you through the process and make it easy for you. And this month, you will get this stunning 3-ounce silver American Virtue coin with a qualified IRA of $20,000 or higher. They actually sent me one of these, and it is amazing. It's very, very heavy, but a very beautiful coin. You can't go wrong with Noble Gold. It's the safest place to put your money right now. Call the team at 877-646-5347 and find out more, or visit noblegoldinvestments.com. That's noblegoldinvestments.com. Okay, so why are black men doing this? Why are black men beating people up on the subway? And more specifically, why are black men pushing people onto train tracks? I believe that the most significant answer here, the answer that we need to, I suppose, focus most on, is the leftist policy of letting crazy people out of prison, or just not prosecuting them in the first place, right? And so here's the problem I don't think people really understand. So the left is always talking about reforming the justice system, right? Judicial reform, reforming the criminal justice system. So some people on the left kind of pretend like this is just criminal justice reform generally speaking. But a lot of other people on the left are very open about why they want to reform the criminal justice system. And the reason that they cite for this is equity. It's this idea that because of historical inequity, historical marginalization, whatever, oppression of certain groups, particularly black Americans, and also because of the systemic racism inherent in the judicial system, that black men are targeted more than any other group for going, to go to prison, to be prosecuted, and to be arrested, and to go to prison. And the idea that, well, actually, black men are just committing more crimes, that's just dismissed as a possibility. Well, no, that's not true. It couldn't be possible that black men are just committing more crimes. No. It's that police target them, they arrest them more often, they're prosecuted more often, and they go to prison more often. But of course, this is ridiculous. Of course, black men in America commit far more crimes than any other demographic group. Everybody knows that. The FBI statistics support that. I mean, black men commit more crime, specifically more violent crime. And so, look, if somebody commits a crime and we need to remove them from society, then we need to remove them from society. You can't take race into account here. It's just they're a bad person. They need to be put away, right? That's it. That is it. So you've got all this crime coming from black men in America, specifically violent crime, and you need to fix that. Well, in order to fix that, you need to figure out why it's happening. Now, first of all, okay, like going back to the whole criminal justice reform thing, okay, let me just finish the criminal justice reform thing before I go into the other stuff. All right. Criminal justice reform, because of racism inherent in the system and historical racism, is just ridiculous, okay? You can't go, oh, well, these guys are black, so we're just going to let them out of prison. What happens when you let violent criminals out of prison just because they're black? Well, then you have all of this crime being committed by black men. There's a number of problems with this. First of all, do we really want innocent people to be murdered or physically injured, maybe permanently, because we decided that we wanted to be racially equitable with criminal justice? I mean, that's completely insane. You want to help good people. You want to put violent criminals back in prison or keep them in prison. You want to keep them away from the general public. You want to stop them from hurting other people. And who are the people they're most likely going to hurt? It's other black people, because typically criminals target innocent victims within their own community. So the people that are going to be hurt the most by these bad black men are good black men, or good black grandmothers, or good black women, or whatever it is, children maybe. You're going to hurt more black people by allowing black criminals out of prison. It's like these people don't understand. But then beyond that, you have this situation in which I think a lot of people on the left think, Americans perceive black men as violent, but they're not really. Well, what's going to happen when you continue to imprison the white criminals, you continue to imprison the Hispanic criminals, you continue to imprison the Asian criminals, although there's very few Asian criminals, but you understand what I mean, but you let all the black criminals out? What happens then? Well, then we see, not only do then black men commit far more crime than most other people, but we've let all of the black criminals out of prison, and so you've got this inordinate amount of crime coming from black men specifically. So then you are actually reinforcing this perception that Americans have that black men are violent. You're doing a disservice to all the good black men in America, right? I mean, the whole idea of just letting black men out of prison just because they're black, I mean, what is wrong with Democrats? They're just insane, right? But then, okay, you got another question is, why are these black men so violently attacking people at random on the subway? Like, I can kind of understand, like, if they're trying to steal something from somebody. I can kind of understand if they're in some kind of domestic dispute, right? I understand all these situations. I don't approve of them, but they make sense to me in my head. Why would a black man go to a random white woman and just physically attack her on the subway? They don't have any idea who this woman is. They just attack her. Or an Asian woman, or a Hispanic woman, or something like that. Or even a black person, another black person. Why did they do this? Well, I think that this is to some degree because of leftist brainwashing. Leftists brainwash black men into resenting society in general and resenting white people specifically, right? You do find that when some of these black men are interviewed after they commit these heinous, violent crimes, they'll say, well, white people are evil, I hate white people, I want to kill white people, this kind of thing. But also just general society. A lot of black men will say, well, society is just horrible. Society is evil to black men. They hurt black people. They're racist against black people, and therefore we have to strike back at society. And so they're almost indiscriminate with who they attack. They can attack other black people thinking they're part of society, right? So you've got this resentment that's built up within black American culture by Democrats. Now, why would Democrats do this? Because it's all about the power in Washington, D.C. Democrats and in local governments as well. Democrats believe they should be in power, whether that's a selfish act or that's a genuine altruistic belief, which it almost never is, but let's pretend that sometimes that exists. It doesn't really matter. The point is that Democrats believe that they should be in power at whatever cost. And one of the ways that they remain in power is they get black people to vote for them. And the way they get black people to vote for them is they say, Republicans are racist against you, society in general is against you, and we will help you to overcome that. And they keep reinforcing that message over and over again to black Americans. You're oppressed. Society did it to you, and Democrats will fight for you against that oppression. Systemic racism, they call it, right? And they constantly brainwash black Americans into believing this. Well, of course, some of the crazier black men in society are going to act out violently because of this. If they truly believe it, they're going to act out violently against it. I mean, it makes total sense, right? If society is unjustly oppressing you your entire life, and your life basically sucks, and you hate it, and you hate the world, and you hate society for it, and you're already a little bit crazy, and you have violent tendencies, you're probably going to lash out against society in a violent way. That's inevitable, right? It's a ticking time bomb type situation. So Democrats are engendering this violence from black men throughout the country, but obviously in regions in which there are a lot of black men, you're going to get more of this, like places like New York City. Another question is, do black men have a genetic predisposition toward violence more than, say, other groups? Now, this is a very taboo question, right? You're really not allowed to ask this in our society. You're not allowed to talk about race as if there are any kind of differences whatsoever, but specifically, are black people genetically predisposed to violence? You cannot ask that, right? Because the assumption is, well, that if you're asking that, that indicates that you must believe it, and therefore you are irrationally racist. Here's the thing about that. I think that's possible. I think it is possible that black people are more prone to violence than white people. I don't know for sure. I mean, I'm not a geneticist. I can't tell you for sure. I have read a couple of things that indicate that there is some kind of genetic evidence for this. But the reason I believe it's possible, not saying that I believe that it's true, but the reason I believe it's possible is because I kind of see it in myself a little bit. When I was a kid, I was actually kind of a violent kid, right? I had a temper. I would get very angry, and I would physically fight kids that would tease me or try to bully me or something like that. I would stand up to them. I would physically fight them. And when I was a kid, this was actually considered a very bad thing. When I was in elementary school, I would get into really big trouble for getting into fights all the time. Not both by teachers and the principal and things like this, but also by my own parents. They were just like, you cannot fight kids. That's a bad thing to do. But I believe very strongly that comes from my Scottish side, right? Because if I look at all my family members, the most aggressively violent person in my family is my uncle, right? And my uncle is, he's half Scottish, and he has got the worst temper of any person I've ever met in my entire life. I've never seen him act out violently, but I have seen him pretty aggressively lose his temper. And my mother used to lose her temper all the time when I was a kid. And I can't tell you how many doors we had to replace in our house because that's how she would express her violent tendencies. She would smash doors. Now, my mom didn't really hit us, really, but she did hit inanimate objects. And the thing is, I only saw this on my Scottish side of my family. My father's side of the family is German. And yeah, I could imagine somebody in that that side of the family losing their temper a little bit, but they were much more reserved, right? And, some people might say, well, but the Holocaust, Germans are really violent. I think there's a big difference between the decision to go to war or to commit some kind of other horrendous societal act and, physical violence that you have in a one-on-one confrontation. Scottish people seem to be much more likely to engage in a one-on-one physical fight than other kinds of Europeans. And I'm sure people from Scotland will write me and say that's not true. But I have a friend who goes by the name Count Dankula here on YouTube, and we've discussed this, and he's told me about all the fights that he's got in after a long night of drinking at the bar, and I'm just like, man, that's crazy. I can't... If you were an American, you'd be in prison already. But in Scotland, this is not such a weird thing, apparently. So... yeah, and I can tell you a story. My grandfather used to tell me stories about his dad, who was from Scotland, and would just get into fights, just get into fist fights and just headbutt people and stuff at the bar. And, people that he would get into some kind of confrontation with. This wasn't just like random attacks. But the point I'm trying to make here is that even within European society, even within the various European cultures, you have differences in, I think, genetic predispositions toward violence. And so that's why I think, maybe there is a possibility that sub-Saharan Africans maybe have a stronger predisposition to violence than white Europeans generally. I don't know if that's true. I don't know. But I think that that's possible. And for people to dismiss this as racist, I think is terrible, because I do think that we should explore the truth of any of these possible reasons for things. And if there are cultural reasons why black people are violent, which is, and I've written this on my Twitter account, I've written, is the problem with black crime in America, is that caused by culture or is that caused by genetics? And almost everybody said culture. And I totally respect that. And I think it could be totally 100% culture. But if it is 100% culture, then we need to look at those cultural reasons why black people are so ready to act out violently in America. But if it is genetic, then we should figure out ways to address that, right? So I do think that there is some benefit in finding out the truth about this. I definitely do not hate black people, right? Trust me, I don't have any issue with black people generally. If you're black, I'm not going to be like, I don't want to be friends with you because you're violent and dumb, or I don't think like that, right? And I think there's very few Americans, at least white Americans, that think like that at all. You meet somebody and you typically, white, black, Hispanic, Arab, whatever they are, you tend to give them the benefit of the doubt, as a human being, right? They're a human being, and you shake their hand and you chat with them until they prove that they're completely awesome and worthy of your admiration, or a complete degenerate and worthy of your scorn, right? This is the way that you should interact with people individually, no matter what culture they're from, no matter what race they are. But Democrats will say, oh, no, you can't talk about genetic predispositions toward anything, or else you're a racist. I think that's ridiculous. I think we need to know about these things. We need to talk about these things. And I guess what I'm advocating here in this video is the ability to speak openly about such things without being demonized as racist, actually trying to get to the core of these problems without hiding our head in the sand, because it is an ugly conversation. Like, what if black people do have a genetic disposition toward violence, right? What if that's true? I think the problem with Democrats is that they say, oh, well, then white people will all suddenly become racist. We'll all go run to our closets and grab our white hoods and start lynching black people, because we just automatically will just assume, well, black people are inferior. Okay, it's never going to happen, all right? Like I said, I believe that Scottish people are genetically more predisposed to violence than German people. I am not racist against Scottish people. Okay, I think Scottish people are cool. Like I think the Scottish accent is cool. I think Scottish culture is cool. I am 1/4 Scottish, and I respect that history, right? In terms of my genetics, right? I love it. I think it's a very cool culture, and so I don't have any kind of bias against it, of course. And so this idea that we're just going to dismiss these kinds of questions as racist is terrible. Because what's going on in the subways right now with black New Yorkers, black men in New York, pushing people onto train tracks, is so vicious and so nasty, and so clearly a problem with specifically crazy black men in New York City, that I do think it needs to be addressed in a way, specifically targeting that group in some way. And it's a little bit of a tough thing to do, because nobody really likes that kind of stereotyping, right? Because there's a lot of good black men. And so you sit there and you say, oh, we got to target black men in New York as the perpetrators of these crimes. Well, then you're lumping in a lot of good black men with these very, very few crazies. But that's the ugly reality, is that it's only black men doing it. And so, we do have to kind of target black men and say, how do we address this in this particular group? We just have to. I mean, it's time, folks. It's time we started stopping this pretense that, oh, it's just general criminals. No, it's specifically black men. And I would like to say this as well. Pushing people onto train tracks into that sort of I don't know what you call it, cavity where you have the train tracks. That is one of the most cowardly violent acts you can commit. Because what do these guys do? They push you onto the train track, you break your collarbone, you break your arm, you could potentially break your neck, you could potentially get hit by a train and killed. I mean, you could potentially just get up, a couple of scratches and bruises, and you're fine. But any way you cut it, this is an act of violence that could end up killing somebody. They do this and then they run off, right? And you don't have time to react. You're stuck in this depression that you have to climb out of. You're probably hurt. You can't strike this guy back. So he has committed this act where there's no real repercussion, but they do get that satisfaction of committing the violent act, because obviously that's what they're looking for, some kind of satisfying attack on somebody. But you also see this with some of the other violent acts, and you notice the people who get targeted. They're very rarely, I've never heard of like a fit young man getting attacked, right? It's always like an elderly person or a very slender like Asian person or a woman or like, maybe an effeminate gay dude, something like that, right? It's always somebody that is likely not going to be able to fight back anyway. And then they're pushed on the tracks, which makes it even harder. And some of these beatings, where they're not pushed on the tracks, but they're just beaten up. Also, it's always somebody who can't fight back, who looks like an easy target. And these criminals, these vicious, violent criminals, they are the most cowardly of people in the world. They're violent and they're cowardly and they're despicable. Now, look. We've talked about the various reasons why somebody might become one of these violent cowards. But the truth is, I don't know if there are other components that drive a person toward this kind of violent act. I'm sure there's some sociologists out there, some psychologists out there that might have other reasons. If you have other reasoning why you think that these people are doing this, please write in the comment section below. I've talked many times about how I think America has become viciously racist against white people and viciously bigoted against straight white men in particular. And I do think that's a huge problem. But I don't know if that is part of this specific issue. In any case, if you think there are other reasons, please let me know in the comments below. I will read the comments because I tend to try to read the comments of all my videos. Don't get to all of them always, but I do try. But anyway, that is it for me. That's it for this video. Again, I do think we should recognize some of the bad things about black culture in America a little more openly than we do and not be so afraid to be called a racist, because it's a ridiculous accusation 99% of the time, and I think we need to stop pretending that every criticism of black men in America is just racism. It's not. There are real reasons to criticize black men as a group. Obviously, there's lots and lots of good people, and there's lots and lots of bad people in every single group. But in this case, this seems to be a problem with black men. So that's it for me. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant. It's just that they know so much. That is not so. Good night.
I am eternally optimistic, and I happen to believe that we've made great progress from the days when I was young and when this country didn't even know it had a racial problem. I know those things can grow out of despair in an inner city, when there's hopelessness at home, lack of work and so forth.